change your Dubai meetings? I said, no.
Well, I thought I was okay when they were saying, oh, I've got doing it. Then they said, no, it's a
Okay. Get it? So, Mr. David, you welcome with us.
أهلا وسهلا مرحبا.
Actually, we would like to get some CV on your tongue. I mean, you have to start by your name, age, and when you came first time for UAE. Let's talk for this part about this.
Okay.
Could you start, please?
Are we ready for that? Huh?
Yes, sir.
Sabah al-khair, salam alaikum. My name is David Neeld. I first came to what was then the Trucial States in 1959. I was 20 years old. And I came to serve as a British officer in the Trucial Scouts, which was a force which was financed by the British Foreign Office with British officers and with Arab soldiers. And I was the youngest officer at the age of 20 ever to serve in the Trucial Scouts, which was quite something. In those days, the headquarters were in Sharjah, and that is where I flew into because the only airport in the region then was in Sharjah at the Royal Air Force Base. There was no airport in Dubai or anything like that in those days. It was still quite primitive here. So that is when I arrived in '59, and shortly after that I was sent to Fort Jahali in Al Ain, where I served in a rifle squadron, and it was when I first met His Highness Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, who was Sheikh Shahbut was the ruler of Abu Dhabi in those days, and Sheikh Zayed was his brother's representative. And I spent many hours with Sheikh Zayed over coffee, and I went hunting with him on many occasions, and I got to know him extremely well. He was, and this was to say before he became the ruler, but it was obvious even then that one was in the presence of a very great man. He had an air about him that you realized you were in the presence of someone very special. He loved his people and the people loved him. And I was very privileged to spend a lot of time in his company. So that was very special memories I have of then. I did nearly 2 years during that tour in Fort Jahali and then at Murfa on the coast, the other side of Abu Dhabi, which was a tented camp. I mean, none of the outstations had electricity in those days. We lived in tents. It was pretty tough, but it was the same for everyone because no one had the luxury and the comforts that you have today. And I really enjoyed my tour. I'd learned to speak quite good. Well, I had to learn Arabic because in those days, certainly none of the soldiers and very few people would speak English. In fact, the majority of the people were illiterate because there were very few schools and medical facilities. There wasn't a single road back then. There wasn't even a road between Sharjah and Dubai. You travelled over the sand. Rather different from today. But I finished my tour in 1961, and then I served with my regiment in Kenya, Berlin, Northern Ireland. But all the time I kept asking that I wanted to come back here because I loved the country, the soldiering was a great challenge, and eventually my regiment agreed. And I came back in the beginning of 1966. And this time I was stationed at Manama, where I was in charge of what was called the Ferka Masanada, the support group. And Manama was part of the Emirate of Ajman. And so I got to know His Highness Sheikh Hamad bin Rashid, who was another great character, extremely well, and I spent a lot of time with him. And a very special moment was in the daytime of the 5th of August 1966, I received a message that I had to take half of my support group, travel overnight. Now remember, there were no roads, and so it wasn't easy. And we had to be at the Mafraq, the crossroads, on the outskirts of Abu Dhabi by first light on the 6th of August 1966. And then I was briefed that, that the royal family of Abu Dhabi had agreed that it was time for Sheikh Zayed to replace his brother Sheikh Shahput as the ruler. And a squadron of the Scouts went into Abu Dhabi. An Arab officer, Abaid Ali was his name, went in, spent quite a lot of time with Sheikh Shahput, who eventually agreed to come out. He was treated with enormous respect, and that was the day that Sheikh Zayed became the ruler of Abu Dhabi. So again, a very special moment, especially as I knew him from my first tour. So that was a very special historic day for me. I finished my first tour, and then I signed on for a second because this is where I wanted to be. I was happy soldiering here. I was promoted to major at the age of 30, which was young, and given command of a rifle squadron. And I was then told that His Highness Sheikh Sagar bin Mohammed al-Qasimi, the ruler of Ras Al Khaimah, had agreed for the first time for a squadron of the Jerusalem Scouts to be based in Ras Al Khaimah territory at a place with the strange name called Hum, which was near Dikdagga on the gravel plain. And I commanded the first squadron that was in 1968, to come here to Ras Al Khaimah. And of course I got to know His Highness Sheikh Sagar extremely well, and he was another great leader. All of them were wonderful people. They had, hardly any of them had any education, formal education, but they were wise. They managed to do the best they could for their people, and they were great leaders. And it was in 1968 that there were many rumours going around that the British government were thinking of pulling out of this region in 1971, and this was confirmed. And the 7 states, the crucial states, were then had no option but to try and form their own country. And initially, Bahrain and Qatar joined in as well. Initially, there were going to be 9, but then Bahrain and Qatar took their own independence, leaving the 7. And this was no easy task, because you have to remember that historically the region had had a great deal of problems, border problems, tribal problems, coups amongst the ruling families were common as well. And so to suddenly get 7 states to unify into one with the history of the region was mush basir. It was not easy. And I, having spent nearly 7 or 8 months here, we moved on to Masafi, and I received a message from Sheikh Sagar that he wanted to see me. And I came back to Ras Al Khaimah to see him, and because I knew him extremely well by now. And we talked about the future, what was going to happen, and his concerns. And he said that he had decided that he wanted to form his own private army, which he was going to call the Gua Mataraka, the mobile force. And I said, well, that's Mabruk, and I wish you well. And he said, no, I want you to leave the British Army, and I want you to form and command it. Now, I was 31, so I was still a relatively young man, and there were many British officers with a lot more experience than myself. But I think because I'd got to know Sheikh Saga well, and we'd had a few problems to sort out while I'd been stationed here, and so I was still a bachelor, and so the challenge to form and command one's own private army was a fantastic challenge. And although it meant leaving the British Army, which was my career, I decided that I would do that. And so I left the British Army and I came permanently to Ras Al Khaimah in 1969. And for the next 3 years, formed and commanded the Ras Al Khaimah Army. And it was during that time that there was a lot of talks going on about the future of the region. And 6 of the 7 states had already signed up to become one. Ras Al Khaimah at that stage had not signed. And there were many people speculated why. They seemed to think that Ras Al Khaimah was not keen on joining. That actually was not the case, because I sat in with many of the talks with Sheikh Saga when he met the other rulers, and it was always on the equality. He said we must all be equals. His concern was that because now Abu Dhabi and Dubai were becoming very prosperous, that he was concerned that Ras Al Khaimah and the others would not play such an important role. That was his only concern. It was nothing else, and I know that firsthand. The other problem, which was discussed a great deal, was the future of the Tumb Islands. Now, the Tumb Islands were acknowledged by Britain to belong to Ras Al Khaimah. But there, where they were located, the entrance to the Straits of Hormuz made them very strategically important. And Britain sent representatives to Sheikh Saga. And again, I sat in on all these talks, so I'm not talking about someone else. I was present at these talks. And they tried to persuade Sheikh Saga to do a deal with Iran. Of course, the Shah of Iran was still in charge in those days. And Sheikh Saga always said, there's no way. The islands belong to Ras Al Khaimah, and he could not trade them away. That was out of the question. He was warned by members of the British government that unless he did a deal with Iran, there was a possibility that after December the 2nd, 1971, that Iran might try and take the islands by bilgur, by force. So we were aware of that, and we were actually making plans, because at the time we had a section of 6 policemen on the Tumb Island, and Sheikh Saga ordered me we were going to put 30 more soldiers on to strengthen it up. And we were planning that. And I'd already put a new radio on the island and waiting for, I actually had it stationed in my house. And on the morning of November the 30th, at about 5 o'clock in the morning, I heard the radio operator from the Tumba Islands calling me. And I answered, and he was very, very quiet, and he quietly told me that there were helicopters flying around the island, and there was an Iranian naval presence, and it would appear that they were about to come under attack. And what were my orders? Now remember, this was November the 30th, so the island was still under British protection. This came as quite a shock, as you can imagine. And I said, do whatever necessary to safeguard yourselves, and I will go to Sheikh Saga, who only lived about 5 minutes away from my home, and inform him, which is what I did at about 5:30 in the morning. So I was the first person to inform the ruler of Ras Al Khaimah that the Tumba Islands were under attack. So again, a very historic moment. Sheikh Saga, when I told him, he said, right, we'll get all the soldiers, the dows and everyone, and you will go off and attack the Iranian Navy. And I said, if that is your wish, Tal Umrak, we are ready, but we only have wooden dhows, they have helicopters, but if that is what you want, we will do it. And then he said, no, Subashwa, wait, and he went to pray. And when he finished praying, he came to me and he said, no, we can't do that. Go back and tell the policemen to lay down their weapons, and we will do our best to, they will be taken prisoner, but we'll do our best to get them back as quickly as possible. I went back, tried to go call him up on the radio. The radio was dead. We all know what happened now. Lance Corporal Salem Sahel had been shot dead, so he was the first martyr of the region on November the 30th. 3 of the other policemen were wounded. They were taken prisoner. The fishing village were ordered to return to Ras Al Khaimah. They buried Salem Sahel first, and Iran occupied the islands, which they've illegally have done ever since. So again, that was a very historic moment that I witnessed here, and there were riots afterwards against Iran and against Britain as well, because Britain was still technically responsible for the external security. But they just wrote a letter of protest to the Shah, which I don't think would have bothered the Shah too much. And so that was that. I then realized that, in fact, Sheikh Saga told me that now this had happened and everything else, that he would shortly agree to join the other 6, which I knew meant that my army would in time be incorporated into the Union Defence Force, which I had no wish to be part of. I'd had my own command, and I didn't want to be a subordinate to anyone else again. And so I took some leave, and this was now in January 72, and I was in Lebanon on a skiing holiday when I heard on the radio the terrible news that the ruler of Sharjah, His Highness Sheikh Khalid bin Mohammed al-Qasimi, had been murdered in an attempted coup by the old ruler Sheikh Saga bin Sultan. This came as a terrible shock because to everyone, and of course to myself as well, because I knew Sheikh Khalid well. When the Emir of Kuwait came for the first time to the area, I did the Guard of Honor in Sharjah with Sheikh Khalid. And he was a highly respected, loved person by his people. And the next day I received a telegram from the family asking me to come to Sharjah immediately. I had plans I was going to go to Africa, but I immediately put that on hold, and I came back to Sharjah, and of course you can imagine that everyone was in a very sad state of shock and grief that they'd lost a wonderful man. And the ruling family told me that because of this, they now wanted to have their own army, which they were going to call the Haras al-Watani, the National Guard, and asked if I would form and command it for them. And I said I would agree to stay for as long as it needed to set it up to ensure the safety of the ruling family and of Sharjah. And I did that for the next 18 months. So I formed two armies here, Ras Al Khaimah and Sharjah. And then in 1973, I eventually left and went to Africa. But I came back on many occasions because, I loved the region. I then married. I brought my wife here to meet all my old friends, and eventually, Sheikh Saga died, and His Highness Sheikh Saud, who I've known since a young man, took over, and since 2013, we have lived very happily back here in Ras Al Khaimah, in which I look on as home. Bas, khalas.
That's okay. Really, it's very great when you talk about your whole existence and you give it us this historical from this time until now. Really, we appreciate. Yes, really, we appreciate. But I think you've done well for all this time, and maybe I can ask you one private question, if you don't mind. How did you feel for all these actions? How did you feel about for all this royal king or royal sheikh or something?
Sorry, about the?
Between royal sheikh family and for opposite for these occasions. Okay, it's me. When you live with all these actions, okay, what do you feel about it? For all these things, pass it on you, and with the royal sheikh, Sheikh Zayed, Sheikh Sakar, Sheikh Sakur, Sheikh, all these things.
Yes.
What you can tell us about it?
Sure. I think what one has to remember is that back in those early days, all the 7 states were extremely poor. This was before oil, when I first arrived. And so it was much easier to get to know members of the ruling families, much easier than it would be today, because obviously things have moved on. And it was realized that because they were poor, it's not like today when a lot of people come here, which is understandable because they want to work and make money, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But in my early days, the rulers didn't have anything. And so the friendships that I formed with them were very genuine friendships. And they still last to this day, because although sadly most of those rulers have now passed away, but their families remember the few of us who were here in those early days purely to help them and not for financial gain. And it made it a very special friendship. And what was incredible with all the rulers, as I mentioned earlier, none of them had a proper, what you would call now a modern education. But they were highly intelligent, and they were aware of the needs of the people. I mean, especially Sheikh Zayed, and we all know the father and founder of the nation. He just had a natural ability to see the problems and how best to resolve them. He was a very special man, as were the other rulers as well, but he obviously stood out because he was the president of the nation. But all of them had the one thing in common as well, which is still true today, I know, that their main concern was, because the region was so poor, that they were desperate to try and improve the living conditions of their people with very limited resources, and that was their main aim. And they were very special people, and I was very privileged to know them.
Actually, we would like to focus for this first time when you came to Sharjah and you met these people maybe before Sheikh Sultan, Sheikh Khalid or something, and your feeling for all these things from this moment until now. How did you find it a different life from this moment until now, after what Sheikh Sultan had done for education, for decoration, for all these things?
Yeah, I think
Mr. Fuad, he recommended to you to can talk about this Sharjah location.
Yes.
How's the people there? How's the heritage? How's the markets and all this things?
Sure. Well, Sharjah was the gateway to the Trucial States. As I mentioned, it had the only airport, and so that was where the Royal Air Force had a base and at the airport, and it was also the headquarters of the True Shalom and Scouts. There was also a British Army cavalry squadron based there as well. So Sharjah was by far the most important emirate in those days, and of course going back to the early days with the pearl fishing, Sharjah was very important in that as well. And it was only when the cultured pearls came in from Japan that that industry was lost. But Sharjah was the most important emirate. When I first came in '59, and the ruler's palace was the center where everything happened. On Fridays, if anything was going to happen, we all would go to the palace, and it was the focal point of the town. Though, as I say, there were no roads in those days. People lived in barustes made of date palms. The little children, when they saw someone like myself, a white man, they'd be quite frightened, and they say, "Oh, Shura," they were, because we were very few of us, and it was intriguing. The officers' mess was a beautiful old building on the coast, on the sea there, and the old souk was just down from there, and there was quite a big gold centre there even in those days. So Sharjah was very much the hub of the region, very much so. And I didn't. The ruler back then in '59 was Sheikh Sagar bin Sultan, who I didn't know. I met him. He was known as a poet and an articulate man. But as I say, when I came back in '66, and he had been replaced by Sheikh Khalid bin Mohammed al-Qasimi, who I got to know extremely well, And I have photographs of when the Emir of Kuwait came on his first visit, and outside the palace we did the guard of honor and Sheikh.
Get any copy, because we try to find here, or even Mr. Ahmad tried on the net, not found. I don't know where we can get some copy of it, if you don't mind. Yeah. So let's talk about your book, sir.
Well, it's called A Soldier in Arabia. And for many years I had been thinking about writing the book, but I was kazlan, I was lazy. It was only when I came back on one occasion and I was with His Highness Sheikh Saud bin Saga al-Ghassemi, who I've known since he was a boy, obviously. And he said, David, it's time you wrote the book. And when you get being an old soldier, when you get an order from a ruler, you have to obey. And so that was when I said, Ana hadha talamrak, and then I started to write the book. And it took me about a year, and it brought back obviously many memories. And I was fortunate in getting Medina, and Shelley, who represents Medina here, took an interest in the book, because they specialize in books on this region, well, on the Middle East. And so it was published. His Highness Sheikh Saud wrote a foreword to the book, and it was launched in Ras Al Khaimah, over 2 years ago now. And it's been very successful. Unfortunately, one doesn't get a great deal of publicity. And you're mentioning now you don't know where to get the book. And I meet people frequently when they hear something about me, they say, you must write a book about this. And I said, I've written one, But it has done well, and I'm very happy that the National Archives in Abu Dhabi have now translated it into Arabic. But now, as far as I know they intend marketing, but at the moment there's only a few copies in Arabic. But that was a very special moment for me when they wanted the book translated into Arabic as well, which I'm very happy about.
Listen from you about this time for Al-Markab time.
Yes.
Do you remember some people said you as a local people or something? And what about equipment there? And what about your ready to be as a saving or serving for this?
Sure. Yes, well, of course, the Al-Markab was the headquarters. Now, I was always in the outstations, and the Qiyada, the headquarters, were at Markab. And the officers' mess moved from the old coast into there. And we always enjoyed coming into Markab because then we had electricity and air conditioning. So it was we would look forward to coming in and maybe having a Yom Khamis or Jummah, the weekend off, and with air conditioning, so which is very special. And I'm many of the old soldiers that are still alive today, and they actually meet up in Sharjah on a regular. And I have attended several meetings of the old Arab soldiers who meet in Sharjah, and it's and what I find very again special is that although I mean I'm now 80 years old, so I'm a shaber now, but the friendships that we forged back in those early days are still very strong today. I mean, my Sergeant Major Rashid Abdullah al-Shamsi, who was with me here in Hum. There's many things in the book which, you know, will take me too long to do now. There are many stories in the book about things. He lives in Al-Ain, and we speak on the phone to each other at least every week, and I go to see him. And some of the officers, one in particular, His Highness Sheikh Faisal bin Sultan. He and I he was an officer at the same time as myself. And again, we meet regularly. I mean, he is now a very important businessman and what have you. But we don't forget those early days. And as I mentioned before, it was because the hardships that we all shared, because there was none of the luxuries of what you see today. And so those friendships are terribly important, and my memories of Sharjah are very special indeed. And I was present a while back when I'm hoping that I think Murkab and some other places are being considered for national heritage sites. And inshallah that will happen, because people must know about those early days, and the fact that the Trish Lomond Scouts, which was based in Sharjah, was only around for 20 years, that's all. But in those 20 years it achieved a fantastic amount, and it brought sufficient stability to a volatile region, which made the creation of the United Arab Emirates possible, and to become the fantastic success that it is today. So I'm very proud to have played a minor part in that, and the headquarters in Sharjah. It makes me very proud.
Actually, I apologize for disturbing you, but we have to finish by some. If you have any memory for some story or some action that's happened for Sharjah, especially, if you remember
the main one would be the ruler of Kuwait.
Okay.
Can I get a copy of the book? Yes, can you get it there, Sally? I got this stuff on. You might show them the Arab. There's the Arabic book there as well.
This isn't for consumers yet. It's for the National Archives. But hopefully for consumers soon. David and I will talk about it.
We try to find the Arabic.
You won't find the Arabic
Yeah,
online.
This English one, what we can find.
Right.
You have to get hold of the National Archives. They printed 50 copies.
50.
Arabic.
Arabic, no.
It's just for their reference.
I see.
But David and I need to have a meeting and say to them there is an audience for the
Oh,
Arabic
I see.
version.
Yeah.
That's the.
Yeah, could you
And
Oh, they're all sort of.
maybe when we arrange for September, maybe we can get them.
yes. Yeah, I need to push the archives to get the Arabic done. Say the English is everywhere online, but of course they can't find the Arabic.
No.
It's good, maybe we can get some. Yeah, I think when we finish.
I can send you all the photographs, don't worry.
Sorry.
I can send you all of the
Oh,
photographs.
thanks a lot. I will appreciate it.
For editing.
I will appreciate it.
That's okay.
أما خلص when we finish the dialogue, maybe we can get some shooting for this.
Yes.
Just tell me which ones you want me to
Yes,
send.
of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get focus. Yeah. Now let's finish with, as I told you, if you have some memory with some, let's say, some habits with some people there.
There was quite a lot of noise going on at times when they were talking, but you can sort that out.
Editing, don't worry, sir. Don't worry. And I think we have to get some chapters, and we put it on screen in front of people and in front of chefs.
Okay, right.
When we give you a prize and ceremony for this, we will give you some background. Don't worry.
That'd be nice.
We appreciate. We came from Sharjah specialty.
You're welcome. أهلا وسهلا.
We are ready.
Sharjah, of course, will always be very, very special indeed, because it was to Sharjah that we first arrived. So your first impression of the region was Sharjah, and there was the old fort there where the RAF base was, and passenger planes came in there, and the passenger would overnight in Sharjah, and then fly on again the next day. So Sharjah was a staging post for what was BOAC, as it was in those days, British Airways today. So Sharjah was the only known emirate because it was the gateway to the Gulf. And it was our the first time we saw the region was Sharjah. And as I say, it was our headquarters and the officers' mess. It was also another very important part of Sharjah, I mean, because it had the port and the harbour, was that we had a dhow, which was called Al-Qaid, the commander, and that was based in Sharjah as well. And that would, because there were no roads and things, so that dhow from Sharjah would supply the outstations like Murfa, because, and take the oil drums to take them out to the station. And to get them onto the dhow, you had to float them into the sea. Yeah. So Sharjah was the strategic location for everything. And it was, if we wanted to meet anyone, it was to Sharjah where we came, because that was the natural meeting place. So I have so many very special memories of Sharjah, and in particular, I think when the Emir of Kuwait came, and we called it a Hara Sharaf, the Guard of Honor, and I commanded it. And again, there were thousands of people at the palace in Sharjah, and the Emir of Kuwait and Sheikh Khalid came, and I had to go up to them with my safe, my sword, and I had to say, Ya Sidi, Ya Hara Sharaf, Farka Masanada, Kamin Wahada La Teftish Min Shanak. And the crowd, when they saw this white man in my shamag and agul speaking in Arabic, they went crazy, and they were all cheering and clapping, and it was quite difficult then, because I had to give the orders, and everyone it was a very happy occasion, but it was difficult for my soldiers to hear what I was saying, because everyone was cheering and clapping. That was a very special moment as well. And there's a photograph in my book of with Sheikh Khalid and the Emir.
Well, enjoyed it with you talking.
You're very welcome.
Of course, we will do some translation our place, this Hortus Center. And actually now we will get some picture, if you don't mind, for some memory, for some painting.
Sure.
If you have any document also, if you would like to show, we can get a shooting by camera. Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank
It
you,
was-
sir.
أهلا وسهلا.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Actually,
مرحبا.
when we finish Mr. Fuad, he will